So, thank you all for being part of this Spirit and Place festival presentation that we are calling Deep Roots. I'm Jeremy Kranowitz. I'm the president and CEO of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. And I'm joined with my partner, Charlie Wiles from the Center for Interfaith Cooperation, and a great panel of folks representing different faith communities that I will introduce in a moment. But first, want to thank sponsors of the Spirit and Place Festival. It includes the Lilly Endowment, the Allen Whitehill Klaus Foundation, the Indianapolis Foundation, IUPUI, and the Bolson Group. So for all of the Spirit and Place events, we just ask for basic ground rules, which are what hopefully we all learned in kindergarten, asking us to be respectful and mindful, to be present, no racial or derogatory slurs, to listen, and to be an active participant. And on this panel, we're going to ask folks to be active participants through the chat box. So there are a number of folks that are participating. We will be moderating incoming comments and questions and referring those to the panelists as we can. So this is actually the 25th anniversary of Spirit in Place, and so we're happy to be part of that milestone year, to be part of this, the festival this year. And we also want to recognize that the overall theme for Spirit in Place this year is origins, and want to acknowledge that we are standing on traditional homelands of the Miami, Potawatomi, Shawnee, and other native peoples who were unjustly removed from this land. So just want to remember to honor them. The other thing that I would like to share with everybody who is participating is that we are interested in hearing what you think about this. If you have things that you want to talk about the technical snafus, that's fair game as well. But if you have other thoughts that you'd like to share, there will be an event survey at the end of this if you go to spiritandplace.org. So this panel is going to explore origin stories from our sacred traditions and what we all share about caring for the world around us. And the basic Zoom rules that we just want to honor is that cameras and microphone will just be for the panelists. I'm asking all the participants, all those that are viewing, to just enter their comments through the chat box. And we have some prepared questions that we prepared for our panelists, but also feel free to ask other questions as they occur to you, and we will address them as we can. So again, my name is Jeremy Kranowitz. I'm the president and CEO of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. Keep Indianapolis Beautiful is a 40-year-old nonprofit organization based here in Indianapolis. And we have a mission to engage diverse communities, to create vibrant public places, to help people and nature thrive. I've been in this job for just over a year. And one of the things that I noted when I first came to Indianapolis is that there are more houses of worship in Indianapolis than in any other, on a per capita basis, than any other big city in the country. And they are of all different traditions and faiths. But the other thing that, of course, is really interesting is that all major faiths share a common thread, which is to take care of the world around us. And KIB over the years has worked with a number of different houses of worship. We've worked with houses of worship to help plant trees or to inspire congregants to go out and clean up their neighborhood. We've also created green spaces in places like the Benedict Inn on the south side and Gethsemane Lutheran Church and a number of other places to help make the city clean, green, and beautiful. I'm also happy to be joined by my colleague, Charlie Wiles. Charlie, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a moment so that we can all actually start to see each other. Charlie, would love for you to unmute and share your screen and talk a little bit about the Center for Interfaith Cooperation.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a real honor to partner with Keep Indianapolis Beautiful on this project. I know we'll talk a little bit about our wonderful experience in the park a few years ago, actually planting trees. And I think that's just a wonderful thing to do as an interfaith exercise. So I'm with the Center for Interfaith Cooperation, and we have a mission to strengthen community in Central Indiana and beyond by supporting existing connections between and among our many wonderful faith traditions, foster additional interfaith opportunities through social, cultural, and educational interactions, and connect communities through volunteer service and civic engagement. I'm pleased to be joined today by all the panelists that will be speaking today and sharing from their unique faith perspectives of how we can be good stewards for our environment. We'll start with Dr. Anita Joshi. She's a representative of the Hindu Temple of Central Indiana. Pastor Chris Henry, he's from Second Presbyterian Church. Ashley Wagner is joining us. She's a representative of the Indianapolis pagan community. Kevin Kimbrough is a member of the Soka Gakkai Buddhist community, and he'll be joining us in just a little while. And we hope that Rabbi Brett Krichiver from the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation will also joining us for the panel discussion. We'll open by asking each of them to introduce themselves, first of all, and share a brief profile about their faith community here in Central Indiana, and then to share some examples about how their congregation or their faith community demonstrates care for the natural environment. So maybe through some of the stories from their sacred texts or from some demonstrated through some of the actions that their communities engaged in, how they maintain their properties and how they work with the community to bring about a more verdant city of Indianapolis. So I will turn it over to Dr. Joshi. Thank you again.
Thank you, Charlie. I am, as you heard, a member of the Hindu community of Indiana, and I worship at the Hindu Temple of Central Indiana, which is located on the east side of Indianapolis. The Hindu Temple it's the only fully functioning Hindu temple in the state of Indiana. And so we have a great diversity of practice amongst Hindus here in the state. And I'm just really excited to be able to be here and to share all of that with all of you.
Great.
Thank you, Doctor. Pastor Henry.
Good afternoon. So I'm Chris Henry, and it's my privilege to be senior pastor of Second Presbyterian Church. We are a congregation with a 182-year history in the city of Indianapolis, starting way down on the circle and then making our way to the current location of the War Memorial, and in 1960 moved to the 7700 North Meridian Street location that is still our home. So we are a congregation of about 3,500 members with reach sort of far beyond the physical location of the church, but have also really been a congregation deeply dedicated to and immersed in the life of the city of Indianapolis, really throughout our history. And so part of what that means for us is taking care of the neighborhood in which God has placed us and caring not only for the people who have been charged to our care, but also for the place that has been charged to our care as well. So I'm grateful to be with you all this afternoon.
Thank you, Pastor. Ashley Wagner.
Hi, my name is Ashley Wagner. I am the representative for the pagan community in Indianapolis. I just want to clarify what that actually means really quickly. The pagan community is not one religious group. It is an umbrella term for many, many, many different religious groups. hundreds of different religious groups, actually, if we're being honest. So some of us are very similar to one another, and some of us are very different from one another in the way that we practice, the things that we believe in, the types of gods that we worship. But something that's pretty universal to all pagans is a deep love and respect for the world around us, and a true effort to try to, if not make it better, at least leave it the way we found it. We do this a lot when we do rituals outside. It's kind of a core tenet of any pagan practice that you don't bring anything with you that you intend to leave there that's not biodegradable and cannot be eaten by the animals that live in that area. You don't bury anything that's not biodegradable. You don't take things and leave them if it's something that cannot return back to nature. So most of our faith paths are very much centered around nature and the natural world. So that's it, I guess, for now.
Thank you, Ashley. Rabbi Brett Krichiver, sure. We just asked to share just a brief profile of your community and your connection with good stewardship of the natural environment.
Thank you, and it's nice to see everyone. Sorry I was late finding the appropriate link, but I'm so happy to be here with everyone. I'm the senior rabbi at Indianapolis Hebrew congregation, which is really the largest Jewish community in the area. We have about 900 families, and we date back to the 1800s here in the community, 1856, when the first Jews moved into the town and helped really found the very beginning of the city. We have been deeply engaged in social justice and environmentalism from the very beginning. We recognize that our sacred texts really call us to care for the earth from the very beginning of that text in the book of Genesis, where it says, God placed humanity in the Garden of Eden to, literally the translation from the Hebrew is to work it and to guard it. And so we recognize our sacred responsibility to care for the earth there. And there are many other connections that we have found in Jewish texts throughout the centuries. Just the most meaningful to me all stem from the entire calendar, which is deeply connected to the cycles of the harvest festivals, and even recognition of when the trees in the winter, actually, it's not going to happen too long from now, actually, when the first buds appear on the trees in the Jewish tradition is one of the New Years that we recognize and celebrate. So it all stems from there.
Thank you, Rabbi. That's beautiful. And I know we'll be joined by Kevin Kimbrough from the Soka Gakkai Buddhist community in just a little while. I think he's having some technical difficulties, but I'm not sure if we want to move on with the questions for the panelists.
Yeah, let's do that. And hopefully, folks, when Kevin is able to join us, we can allow him a few minutes to introduce himself and his community. But one question that I would like to just start with for the panel, and I guess the best way to maybe recognize each of you this way, it would be easier if we were all in the room together, but if you could just sort of raise a hand, I'd be happy to recognize you that way. So, we Ashley and Brett touched on this a little bit. Well, I think you all did a little bit, but many faiths reference nature and the natural world in their sacred texts and in their practices. But I'm asking if each of you could share sort of an origin story, because since origins is the theme for the Spirit and Place Festival, an origin story that sort of exemplifies this concept from your respective faiths. Chris, would you like to go first?
Well, Jeremy, I forgot the most important part of my introduction, which is that I actually have a hard stop a little bit after 4 o'clock. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone so that you didn't think I had dropped out of the call out of frustration or technological ignorance. And then I would like to invite Rabbi Brett to share my tradition's origin story.
That's very kind. Well, and it's interesting. We have shared this. We have had this conversation a little bit, Chris and I. We do have the general thrust of that origin story in common. The interesting point of perspective, I think, from the Jewish community is that that origin story, Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, there are very different ways to interpret those texts. So I know that for example, in the Christian perspective, and again, I'm not the expert in that, but there's an emphasis placed on the fall of humanity from that sort of idealistic world. By the way, the rabbis point out that in that idealized world, God makes it pretty clear in Genesis chapter 1 that we're only supposed to eat plants. So there are many who argue that the Jewish tradition should be staunch vegetarians. It's not until the story of Noah after the flood when we first find out that we can eat hamburgers. But the general thrust, as I mentioned, from both of our traditions, begins with this phrase that we are here for a reason. That Genesis chapter 1 helps us understand maybe not how the world was created, but why the world was created. Why is humanity here? And it's very clearly that we are here to work the land, which is the sense of using the natural resources, but also to protect the land and guard it. There's even a rabbinic commentary that comes along much later where it's attributed to God. One of the rabbis says, God came down and said, be careful with this creation that I've given you, for if you destroy it, there will be no one to come after you to repair it.
Lovely. So Chris appreciated that pass, the lateral pass. Do you want to respond to that, Chris, or do you want to riff off of that?
Well, no, Brett is always wiser than I, and I always appreciate what he has to say. And I do, we share that, Christianity is, of course, deeply rooted in the origin stories that we find in Genesis as well. The two things that I would add that are perhaps uniquely Christian are just to pick up where he left off on the fall. Part of our understanding of sin, or human inability and unwillingness to respond favorably to God's grace or live into that grace. One of the ways that we understand that is that we do harm to the world that God has gifted us with. And so, of course, innumerable examples of that, both within Scripture, but also, of course, in the present time. But that is built into our understanding of what it means to be broken, fallen human creatures, is that we fall short of God's design for creation, in that we mar God's creation, in that we do harm to God's creation and exploit, God's creation as well. The only other piece I would add, that because it's sort of the distinctively Christian part of that origin story, is that we then, in the birth of Jesus, the way that we understand his coming into the world, the first chapter of John, the Gospel of John, explicitly borrows the language of the first chapter of Genesis and says, in the beginning, and then rather than God created, the text says there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and that then becomes the story of Christmas, the story of the birth of Jesus. But in John, the phrase is, the Word became flesh and lived among us, and that Word being Christ. And so for Christians, the material world, the physical world, the created world has that sacredness that comes from being lived in by God's Son. So the fact that incarnation, as sort of one of our theological pillars, tells us that God does not disregard or remove God's self from this creation, but rather became part of it and was born into it. And so in that way has sort of sanctified this world, not just sort of the kingdoms beyond this world.
Thank you. Yeah, Anita.
So obviously the Eastern religions have a very different take on origin stories than the origin story of the Abrahamic faiths. And the fundamental difference is that there is a continual creation. There is always creation. There is no beginning and there is no end. that
Mhm.
time is cyclical and that it will continue, and that it is our manifestation on earth in the form of matter that we refer to when we think of creation, because we think of it in this kind of narrow way. And I mean, we as in Hindus as well, we sometimes think of this creation as just this small piece of the larger picture that's going on and eternally creating. So for Hindus, the creation story is very much comes from the sound of Om, and that sound is actually what manifested into matter. And so the sound, the power itself of the universe is that power of divinity. So the divine voice, if you will, is what caused creation. And that sound and that divine permeates every part of the creation. So there is nothing within the creation that is not sacred, because it is from divine itself. And so it is up to us in following the path, which Hindus would refer to as dharma, the path of right practice, to care for all of this creation, to create a bountiful earth for all to be able to enjoy, and that we are the ones who are responsible for the care of every piece of divinity, including ourselves and each other. And so because of that, we are all deeply, deeply connected. And so I also, as a Hindu, will give a shout out to Rabbi Brett on the vegetarianism, because that's a huge piece for us. Because again, that is that sense of doing no harm, the karma, the negative energy, positive karma, positive energy, neutral energy that flows in the earth is something that continues. And that energy cannot just disappear, but it can be changed. And so it is up to us to continually change that energy and rejuvenate the earth by doing so.
Thank you, Anita. I saw that Kevin was able to join us, but I'm just wondering if we just lost him again. So Kevin, if you're able to get back on, wonderful. Ashley, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in as well on this first question.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Because paganism's not one faith, it's an amalgamation of a lot of different faiths together. I can't speak to everybody's origin stories. What I can say is that we do have them. They are quite different, depending on who you're talking to and depending on what faith tradition it is that you are practicing. A lot of them go back to the old myths and legends of how things were created. Like, for example, the Norse creation myth has to do with a giant and the different parts of the giant that are different parts of our world. And there's my personal faith practice is I'm Wiccan loosely, and we have a sort of origin story about the universe being created by a sound, like very similar to how Anita said that it was created by a sound. Everything came from that sound. It's a continuous cycle of creation and destruction and recreation, and individual creation myths vary from religious group to religious group. There's even debate in our communities as to who came first, us or the gods. Did they create us? Did we create them? I have lots of opinions about those that I can share at another time if you'd like, but it's much more similar, even though paganism by and large is a Western religious practice and based off of Western Western religious groups. It holds a lot more in common with Eastern religious practices in the ways that we view the world and the life cycles and creation and destruction.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. Well, hopefully it's interesting to hear how the four of you have yourselves together. But I find that fascinating. Well, hopefully we'll be able to turn to Kevin in a moment, but I wanted to note two things. One, again, if folks who may have just received the notice about the new Zoom address late and joined a few minutes after we began, if you would like to ask a question of the panel, please do so through the chat box, and we will ask those questions of our panelists. I am actually going to move on to a second question, though, for folks on the panel. So Brett, you mentioned briefly holidays. I don't know if you were referring to Tu B'Shvat, which seems to be a holiday that should change depending on climate change as to when we actually celebrate it. But I'm wondering if each of you could share in turn sort of a favorite holiday or a particular holiday that really sort of deals with growth of plants or trees, something that is sort of nature-based in your respective practice, and something that you might want to share with folks in the audience. I don't know. I mentioned, Brett, I mentioned you only because of Tu B'Shvat, and I didn't know if that was the holiday that you were referring to, but and that might not be your favorite one. But
well, I'm going to continue what I think is a trend based in profound wisdom, and I'm going to ask Anita to share. I would really love to hear what her perspective is on holidays and her tradition. We call that popcorn in my daughter's 8th grade class.
Oh, lovely. Well, that sounds great. So there is no one particular holiday that would just celebrate trees or nature, as I said earlier, because all of it is kind of tied together. But nature and trees and plants are very much, rivers and mountains are all very much part of the worship practice in Hinduism. And so, in fact, there are beautiful stories about how the river Ganga, the Ganges River, as it's known in the West, it came to Earth and actually came to Earth to protect and save the Earth. And there are beautiful stories of the Mother Goddess, springing forth from the Earth, bringing forth different bountiful, things for us to enjoy. In fact, the holiday that's coming up, Diwali, actually is a celebration of prosperity and bounty as part of that celebration. And so we invite the goddess, Mother Goddess, into the home, Lakshmi, and the goddess Saraswati, to bring both knowledge and prosperity. But part of that practice is to share the bounty of the earth with one another. So that sharing of food and the sharing of care and charity is very important to this part of the holiday. So it's not specific for a tree or a plant. There are actual times when trees are honored and worshipped, and sacred threads are tied around them for certain services. But it's not for one holiday. It's done in a variety of different holidays. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Lovely. Thank you. Again, we popcorned it around. We just sort of passed all this stuff around. So Chris, I know you've got your time constraints, so I want to actually turn to you next if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, in some ways, similarly, I can't think of a specific sort of Christian-wide practice festival or holiday that deals with creation. And yet, as I think about the different holidays that Christians celebrate, almost all of them have some component of care for or participation in creation. So certainly the celebration of the resurrection at Easter especially for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, has, nice resonance with the blooming and blossoming that also happens that time of year. And yet that's more happenstance in some ways than it is intention, though it's become a wonderful metaphor for how we understand resurrection. Similarly, I would say the celebrations around whether it's Christmas or actually the one I was thinking about just because it's among my favorite Christian holidays is Pentecost, which is when we celebrate the birth of the church and among the earliest disciples of Jesus. And we understand Pentecost and the birth of the church as the Holy Spirit coming into the world, and the phrase is as a mighty wind or a rushing wind. And so this understanding again that God is active in the movements of creation, in this case, the wind, and that's one way that we understand the Holy Spirit, the presence of God among us is, I believe the Hebrew word, Brett, is ruach. So the wind of God, which then becomes the Spirit of God, the breath of God. And so the celebration of the church, the birth of the church as being God's Spirit moving through like this wind. So it's an interesting question because there's not a specific holiday that I could point to. And yet, as I walk myself through the calendar of Christian holidays, each one seems to have some sort of incarnational creation-based component to it. I would just also say, and Charlie may be able to speak to this better than I, but representing the whole Christian family, I know that many of the saint days that are celebrated by Catholics and many Orthodox Christians also lift up their role in creation care. And of course, having recently celebrated the Feast of St. Francis, which is not we don't have saints in my tradition, but as representing the full Christian family, I know that the celebration of the Feast of St. Francis has become a time, because of Francis's emphasis on creation care, of doing things to care for the created world. And often even Presbyterian churches like mine will have blessing of the animals ceremonies as part of that too.
Yeah, Pastor Henry, that's a great segue to the first question we got from the audience. And yeah, we do honor St. Francis of Assisi, and he's the saint that you often see in people's gardens with, holding a bird bath or having birds and squirrels on him. So yeah, St. Francis of Assisi, I think, is a wonderful example of someone who communes with nature and brings nature into the sacred. So our first question is from a woman, Wilma, and she's asking, care for creation is taking care of the animals. She said Jewish ancients let the animals rest on the Sabbath, but she said so often today we see people being cruel to animals, and even some of the industry we talked about, the food industry, culling elephants, she mentions, and poaching is deplorable. So she asked what part of the faith traditions represented on the panel, how much of a mandate is there to care for the animals? And maybe even go back to Rabbi Brett's first question about, are we meant to be vegetarians?
Well, I might jump in if I can. I do appreciate Wilma's comment there that, caring for the earth, it provides a mandate for environmentalism, but it also does provide a mandate from, I believe, all of our faith traditions to care for the entirety of creation, which would include, not only the animals, but also other human beings. So I think that maybe the most powerful idea from the Abrahamic faiths is this idea of oneness, that there is a unity that pervades all of creation. And in the Jewish concept of that unity, there is no distinction made. It is not like God is necessarily some external force, not to get too much into Jewish mysticism, but there's a whole field of this study that suggests that God pervades all of creation, so that when you see the spirit that animates animals, the energy that manifests in human beings, the energy that is in trees and even in inanimate objects like rocks and all of that there is a oneness, that is God, and that God literally withdrew from God's self in order to create space for this world that we live in to exist. So caring for animals is literally caring for God, bringing God into the world. I think that I just want to mention about the holiday, I'm also very grateful that Wilma mentioned Shabbat, because more than one Jewish philosopher has suggested that out of all of the holidays, and I think that there is clearly an environmental origin for every Jewish holiday, but more than all of those holidays, the most important one, the most significant one, the one that contains the most holiness, is the Sabbath. It is that cycle of time that has kept our people alive. And the Shabbat, the Sabbath, is premised on, there were these 6 stages or 6 days of creation, and God rested on the 7th day. So this is what we do to commemorate that, the acts of creation and the beings that were created then.
Thank you for that. Ashley or Anita, would you like to weigh in?
On holidays?
On Wilma's question about cruelty to animals and talking about that piece as part of caring for creation.
Sure, I would like to say something about that. Absolutely. We trying to get a bunch of pagans to do all one thing together is literally impossible. And having had leadership roles within the community for many years, I can tell you it's literally impossible. However, a lot of the pagans that I know and work with do practice vegetarianism, veganism. Me, myself, I am vegetarian. But the biggest thing for us is wherever you source your proteins from, that you source them responsibly and with respect. I know quite a few people who do their own hunting, and they actually do use every part of the animals that they kill, and they hunt with respect and reverence for those animals. I have even seen them do prayers over their bodies after they've been killed. For us city pagans, we do try to responsibly source our proteins, whether it's ethically sourced meats or buying from specific local farms that we know practice ethically. I do feel that it's a responsibility for all of us to care for the world around us. If we don't, it's not going to be there anymore. We're not going to be able to sit under the shade of a tree if we cut them all down. We're not going to be able to listen to the song of a bird if they're all dead. So every pagan that I've ever talked to has had a deep reverence and respect for the world around us, and a knowledge that it is our responsibility to care for the things around us, even if it wasn't us personally that broke them to begin with. It is still our responsibility as a being on this planet to try to help and try to make the things around us better. And for some of us, that means switching to a vegetarian or vegan diet. For some of us, it just means ethically sourcing, and trying to gently encourage others to do the same thing, or making it easier for others to do the same thing. Pagans are very much about feasting when we have rituals and celebrations. I've never been to a pagan celebration that didn't have a lot of food at it. And especially in recent years, the people that I practice with have been very conscious about making sure that there is something there for everybody's dietary needs, that there are always vegan dishes available. And there's some pretty good cooks in the community too. So the vegan dishes are delicious if you'd like to try them. So because a lot of our religion is based around, and going back to the holidays, our entire holiday cycle is one cycle of the year and caring for the earth and the things that you do at certain times of the year to do those things. I like to think that we're very conscious about those things. I know that it's, again, not true for everyone, but there's so many things about our religious practices as a whole that encourage us to be that way, that we can't help being that way. There's so much emphasis on making sure that things are able to return to the earth, that they are able to fertilize the soil so that crops can grow and animals can flourish, that I think it's fundamentally built into our religious practices to be more conscious of the world around us and how we can contribute in that way. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, thank you. Anita, did you want to add anything or?
I think we covered it. I think the
Okay.
only word I would add is that concept in Hinduism is ahimsa. It's non-injury. And so at every moment, the goal is to have as much non-injury as you can, non-harming. And so that would include all sentient beings, not just humans.
Jeremy, I'd like to just weigh in a interfaith
please.
perspective. I mean, I had a great grandmother who was Seventh-day Adventist, and I know they're vegetarians. If you've ever had food from Loma Linda, they even, you know, when I was just a child, that was a big deal. And I think they got their mandate directly from Genesis, and I forget the exact quote. But from an interfaith perspective, we started celebrating an interfaith banquet several years ago. And we tried to find a meal that was accommodating for all the different faith traditions that gathered, and we had to go towards vegetarianism. It was just much easier. And I believe in the first one, we had a rabbi came and even looked at all the different ingredients, and we got that approved. So we really strived to make a meal that everyone, no matter their faith practice, could come and really enjoy. And I think we got a lot of really positive comments on how good that food was. We had a great caterer. But I had a question because I know that in the Jewish tradition, there's kosher. So I know that maybe lends itself to a little bit to what Ashley was talking about, how we respectfully take life, and it's just not, again, done for profit, not done in any inhumane. And I know the Muslims also have halal. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. And I'm not sure in the Christian tradition if there's some others that Pastor Henry might be aware.
I do appreciate that you mentioned kashrut, because there was actually a really very interesting conversation that started maybe about 10 or 15 years ago in our community. Some of you may be aware of this. It was a little bit of it started off as a sort of embarrassment. The kashrut industry, which provides kosher meat, which is prepared a certain way by very strict ethical standards, at least in theory. There was the major supplier in the United States it was called Agri-Processors, and it was in Potsdam, Iowa. Now, why do I remember that? Because it was the largest federal raid in United States history, employment raid. They discovered deplorable working conditions in this factory. The way that workers were treated was horrific, and also the way that the food was being treated. It was being done by strict religious standards, but it seemed to have missed, a piece of that, day in school. So it did spark a large conversation especially in the liberal branches of Judaism, which I represent, to say, well, what do we mean when we say kashrut? Is it enough just to make sure that the technical requirements are fulfilled, or is there some greater ethical mandate? Maybe not only the animals themselves, the way that they're treated, but also the workers in those facilities. So and actually in the conservative movement, they came up with an additional stamp. It's called a hechsher. So if you were in the supermarket and you see your Oreo cookies have a little symbol on them, it's usually a U with a circle around it. That's the union. It's an OU, and it's the Orthodox Union that has certified. And they do, as I think Charlie suggested, they'll come and inspect the whole process in order to put that stamp on there. They came up, the conservative movement, with an additional stamp that's called eco-kashrut. And it's actually taken off to some degree, a little bit less in recent years, but it's to certify that not only have the religious standards been observed, but that also we've paid attention to more contemporary ethical concerns.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi.
And Jeremy, the only thing I would add is that Wilma is a member of my congregation, and she's represented us better than I could. So I'll second her observations in the chat. Thank you, Wilma.
Well, and I love that, and we could do a really deep dive on food alone. Just as a quick aside, a few years ago had the chance to meet with the CEO of Tasty Bite, which makes Indian food that you might see in some grocery stores. And he talked about going through the process of getting it certified both halal and kosher and how it's about 99% the same, including rules about how long a vessel should rest in between having different ingredients inside used in them. He said it was remarkably similar as you started to think about those two different certifications. But I know that we're about to lose Chris soon, so I want to turn to a third question. And Chris, I'm going to give you the first crack at it, and then I know you've got to sign off. But one of the things that I think it was mentioned earlier. Oh, Ashley was talking about city versus country and what the differences what the differences are there. But certainly in the city, it can be harder to have access to nature and to explore nature and to make that part of our daily lives. And also just during the pandemic, it has been particularly difficult to gather anyone indoors. So I just wanted to ask what your respective institutions are doing to encourage people to connect outdoors or other ways. But there may be other ways that you're encouraging your congregants and others to connect, but I'm really interested in sort of exploring how you're trying to encourage people to connect outdoors or with nature. And Chris, I want to give you the first shot at it because I know you have to leave at 4.
Sure. Well, yeah, this has been a year of innovation in so many different ways, and this is certainly an example of that. I happen to believe that God has given us the most beautiful fall in Indiana because we need to be outside this fall above all other times, and so it's been a real gift to be able to do that. So we've shifted in lots of different ways, and I could give lots of really interesting examples about drive-up services. And we are very fortunate to have a large physical space, both indoors and outdoors. And then our church has a community garden on the south end of our property that we started, they started 6 or 7 years ago. And the purpose of the garden was to provide food for our food pantry so that what we were giving to those who were coming to the food pantry was not just prepared, canned, processed foods, but also fresh produce that we grow here on the campus. And the wonderful kind of perhaps unexpected benefit, especially this year, of having that garden is that it is also a wonderful gathering space. And so we have had lots of small group gatherings and staff meetings, and we have a group of residents, young pastors serving here, and we've had our seminars up in the garden as well. And so we've really been able to commune outdoors and appreciate the gift of creation in a really different and exciting way because of this. We have a creation care committee here at Second that one of their responsibilities or one of their projects is the garden. And so they're kind of the anchor there. But I think more people have experienced that space over the last 6 months than probably would have in any normal year. I guess the one other thing I would say is we started in the summer we called it Sacred Spaces at Second. We wanted to open our sanctuary because that is a sacred space that many in our community really appreciate the opportunity to be in. But we were also still at the place that we might be headed back to where gatherings in the sanctuary of any size were really not safe or appropriate. So what we were able to do was have the sanctuary open certain hours for individuals to register to come and just be in that space. But when we did that, we said, well, let's also set up a prayer walk around our campus for folks so that it's not just the sanctuary where we experience God's presence, but outside as well. So some of our residents put together a really nice resource for walking the grounds of Second and praying as we do. So really a prayer walk, which is a part of our tradition. The last thing I'll say is that we have a labyrinth here on site, which is another of those spiritual practices that involves both movement and often, not always, but often being outdoors. And lots of folks have made good use of that over the course of this time as well. So it's been innovative and sort of forced creativity, but we figured out some ways to do it.
Lovely. Thank you for that. I love that prayer walk idea. Do others want to weigh in on this? Yeah, Ashley, please.
Yeah. So our sacred spaces are outside. We don't have buildings, or we don't have churches, we don't have sanctuaries, temples, anything like that. When we get together to practice, it is either at an outside venue or, with weather not permitting, inside somebody's home. So our groups are very small to begin with, but we still have had changes. A lot of groups in Indianapolis do hold public rituals where they invite anybody in the community who wants to come and participate. The catch is you have to participate. You can't just stand and be a looky-loo and watch. But we used to do that all the time, and even some groups are actually required to, by their faith path, to have a certain number of open rituals. Now with COVID, that has changed a lot. One of the groups that I work with has not met at all this year, except for one meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. Another group that I work with has been able to meet regularly because our group is so small, and we've been able to maintain social distancing while at ritual. It's been very hard not to hug my coven members, I can tell you that. But our sacred spaces are outside to begin with. So the only thing that has been really difficult during this time is not being able to practice with as many people as you normally would, and the same people that you normally would, because obviously everybody has health issues. I guess not obviously. A lot of us have health issues. And we can't be around even a group of 10 people at one time, just because the risks are so high for some of us. So I think that probably I've seen more people doing small hiking trips, small rituals in the park, very, very small things where instead of inviting the general public to participate, we are only inviting the people that are a core part of that group to come and participate. And only if they feel comfortable doing so, and only if they're wearing a mask when they're doing so. I really have not seen many people outside of the groups that I normally practice with on a regular basis since COVID started. And even then it's less frequent because of COVID. But we've done other things. There is a weekly discussion group that I participate in. Every Sunday morning we meet and we have our, pagan study group, and we talk about different things about paganism and how it affects us and how the world is affecting our paganism and how we adapt and how we change. And that is something that I hadn't been able to participate a lot in before COVID. So it's good that we've been able to learn those kinds of things about each other. And we have learned a lot about each other through that. So it's been, instead of big holidays that we get together for, it's been a lot of smaller things that we've gotten together for here and there. Just being very conscious of who we are inviting. So it's been tough because you don't get as much variety when it's just the people that you see all the time. And we like to have those outside opinions of people coming in with new practices and new ways of doing things to teach us, and for us to teach them our ways of doing things so we can share that information. So I guess really that information exchange at ritual what has been really lacking this year, because we can't have other people come and join. It's just been the core group.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting year.
Mm-hmm. That's one word for it.
Brad, yeah, please go ahead.
I was thinking about, the specific timing of this quarantine has been really interesting because the specific holidays that we have, needed to observe during this time have provided different opportunities. So the Jewish high holy days happen, which is, kind of the, it's our Christmas and Easter, if you're familiar with those festivals. But it's 10 days apart. So this is really an intense season of holidays, and we did the entire thing over Zoom. But at the end of that season, we arrive at the first of the harvest festivals, which is intentionally focused on the fall harvest that's happening in the land of Israel. And in some ways, it's still happening in the United States then. And this is the holiday of Sukkot, which is the festival of booths, if you're familiar with that, where it has an acknowledgement of the Israelites wandering in the desert, the huts they lived in, but the observance is to build this sort of agricultural hut outside in our backyards. And you bring in different symbols of branches and fruits that are representative of the harvest that's happening in the fall. We weren't able to do it. I mean, the whole point is to gather everyone in these wonderful little, what are called sukkot out in the backyard. At IHC, we had a big one out in the front yard. And what we decided to do was we literally kind of tore off one side of the sukkah. We put it right up against the driveway. And we literally had people drive through and to sort of observe, to get a little gift, to have a taste of being in the sukkah. You know, it wasn't the same, but it was a way for everyone to see one another and to just connect. I think that's really what people are missing. You know, we weren't even really able to do it at home, though. It's just been a real, it's been a real difficult time.
Yeah. So it's the fast food approach to holidays. Just make them all drive-throughs. Anita, do you want to weigh in on this one as well?
Sure. It is interesting because the holidays did start, this whole pandemic started on the weekend of actually Holi, which is the spring celebration of colors for Hindus. So it was we were just starting to get locked down. So, or just starting to think about locking down. We didn't even actually have an official lockdown at that point. It was far less people. We actually chose not to go to celebrate Holi that year, in March. And it was very strange not to be there, but there were people still celebrating outside. And then for the Hindu holidays, a lot of Hinduism is practiced in the home. So you can practice with your family and then connect in other ways, and so we did use a lot of technology. But outdoors is important in Hinduism, and so many of the ceremonies that occur with what we call yagyas or fires, that we use the fire as a central part of the celebration, are done normally outside on the grounds of the Hindu temple in this area that we've built for that. And so those continued. So there were ways for people to be outdoors and still do things. Diwali, as I said, is starting on Friday. So our celebration of 5 days of Festival of Lights is Friday. And we will be doing that. Part of that is fireworks on Saturday night. And so that will be outside. And so there will probably be people in their cars driving in and watching fireworks. But so there'll be a little bit of drive in, if you will. But yeah, I think, we're doing the best we can. Obviously, we miss it because as with every one of our traditions, Christian traditions, Jewish traditions, pagan traditions, Buddhist traditions, we love food and we love families and we love our community and we love being together. And I think that's what we're missing doing. So hopefully there's good news on the horizon and we will be able to get through this and we will see it through.
Great. Well, so I want to, I've one more question that I want to ask you all, but I also just want to encourage folks that are watching by Zoom to please feel free to ask questions in the chat box and we will respond to those as well. But so one that is near and dear to my heart from the perspective of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, I want to share a quick story, which is that I was having a conversation with Bob Bosley, who folks may know is the president of the city council. And he was talking about how he went to church with his 96-year-old mother, to the same church she's been going to her entire life. And they had a pastor who noted that in the community where their church was, there had been a recent collection of litter and there was some lots that had some that just weren't being taken care of nearby, and lamented the fact that the city wasn't doing its job. And Vop, I'm sharing this story I think with his permission. He shared it with me a couple of times. But he talked about driving his mother back home after services and turning, Mom, what would have happened when you were younger? And she said, what do you mean? We just would have gone across the street and picked it up. If we wanted the area near our church to look nice, it was our we felt like it was our responsibility. And he said, right. So he said, I went back to church the next day and I said to the pastor, you are my spiritual leader, but human to human, I think you're wrong. It is the city's responsibility, but it is also our responsibility. And so therefore it's your responsibility as our spiritual leader to tell us that we have an obligation to make the area around our house of worship look nice. So I agree with that entirely. And I just wonder if the panelists have sort of thoughts or reactions to that about how we can work together on this shared obligation to make our various corners of the city look great. I don't know who wants to jump in first. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Ashley, I will get to you, but Chris, how are you doing on time?
Yeah, I will. I wanted to be able to answer this question, so I'm gonna be a little late to my other meeting, but I wanted the chance to weigh in on this just because in some ways, it's the reason I'm here, and I know, Jeremy, the reason you do what you do. One of the ways that I think about this has to do with that. Nobody knows quite where the proverb comes from. I've done a little research on it, but the proverb is, we do not inherit the world from our parents, we borrow it from our children. And certainly in the Christian tradition, this notion of preserving what God has given us, the word we would use is stewardship, being good stewards of what God has given us so that it might be a blessing for those who come after us, is just core to every part of what we do, and certainly core to the way we should, and many of us do, seek to care for creation. So I think I have a friend who is writing a dissertation right now, and he's doing it on practices of democracy. He's a political theory guy, and he's doing it on practices of democracy because he says what our polarization has put us in such a place where talking about beliefs of democracy or convictions of democracy are so polarizing and are so much in debate. What is perhaps not in debate is the practices that make us who we are. And so when I think about interfaith commitment to something like care of creation, it's really interesting and wonderful to discuss the different places from which we derive these convictions. But in some ways, I think what we did a few weeks ago, planting trees down at Garfield Park, was, to me, that's interfaith cooperation, because the actions that draw us together, the folks, I come from Georgia, and the folks who started Habitat for Humanity there in Americus, Georgia, one of the things that led them to do that is they say it's very hard to argue with someone when you're swinging a hammer next to them building a house. And I would say the same thing about planting a tree or picking up litter or being in the garden or what, if our efforts and our intentions are turned toward this common goal of caring for something that we all agree has been entrusted to us, borrowed from our children, then it's very hard for us to strike up arguments about the finer points of orthodoxy. And I think that's what God intends for us, to find that commonality in action and in practice that we may not always find in doctrine. So thank you so much for letting me be here. And I'm so sorry to have to leave before hearing my friends and colleagues respond as well. But blessings to you all, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Ashley, I know you wanted to weigh in as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that we as a group tend to do a lot of is, as I said before, when we go to a ritual, we don't leave anything behind, and we try to leave the space as good as, if not better, than the way that we found it. Most of the time, I completely agree with that sentiment that if you see trash on the ground, you just pick it up. It's just part of what you're supposed to do. I keep a trash bag in my purse with me at all times. When I go hiking with friends, I bring a trash bag with me, and most of my friends do as well. So that if we find trash on the trail, which you're always going to find trash on the trail, you can pick it up and take it out of the park with you. And I think that is something that, as a religious group of people, seems to be a pretty common idea. That if you see trash, you pick it up. If you are at ritual, you find trash and you pick it up. You don't leave anything behind with you that's not biodegradable or can be eaten safely by the animals that live in that specific area. When you leave your offerings, you make sure that it's edible, which has other reasons behind it as well. But it's really so that when it is returned to the earth, it's something that will not spoil the earth. There's certain types of offerings you can't leave in certain areas because it will spoil the area that you are leaving it in. You can't, one of the groups I work with, they have an agreement with the White River that they leave offerings for the White River at every ritual they have, and the offerings they pour into the river have to be something that is compatible with the flora and fauna of the river. So something that could not potentially spoil the river. I think part of it is just part of it is a slightly different view of the world around us and our role in it, as how we are to behave in nature, rather than have nature being something that works for us, having us be something that works with nature. And that's a very important shift of worldview that I think not everybody understands. But that's kind of what I took from that statement, I suppose.
I have nothing but agreement here, but I was having an interesting thought that I wanted to share, that it looks at your question a little bit backwards. I do believe that any opportunity that we can make a commitment to one another to work together in the city, in the state, is really valuable. But the flip side of it is also true, that often I think, and you've got a wonderful crowd here today. It's challenging for us to make the time, to learn about each other's traditions, to share in each other's rituals. And the truth, I think, is that if I was to offer, come and visit, and we've done this, we're gonna have dinner at 8 different religious sites around the city. The truth is we get a very small turnout for that. But I do think that focusing on an issue like creation care, it just gives us all the opportunity to roll up our sleeves and feel like we are engaged in the mission work. We're all mission-based organizations. And we, as interfaith, multi-faith people, I think we kind of sneak that other part in, It allows us to all feel like we're doing good work together while we're learning about each other.
I'd like to echo that a little bit. I'm in a multi-faith household. My wife's from Tokyo, Japan, and we try to bring as much of the tradition. Typical Japanese grow up with a lot of Shinto and Buddhist tradition, just integrated into their secular practices. So we've done some of that with our daughters. And my wife typically avoids a lot of the work that I do. She doesn't come to a lot of the events and just doesn't get involved so much. And that's just the kind of person she is. But she did, and she was very interested in coming to Garfield Park and help plant the trees. She was intrigued by that. And she really did enjoy just the fact, hearing a few prayers. And then as soon as we were done with the prayers, we literally and figuratively got our hands dirty, and we planted 4 trees, just my wife and I, and she got a lot of satisfaction out of that. And I did also, even from my kind of spiritual moorings, in that, that whole metaphor that we're providing the shade for future generations to enjoy. We're doing it together. It's also providing oxygen. It's also beautifying the neighborhood. It's also celebrating, a milestone of Indianapolis, that was its centennial year and 200 trees. So I thought that all came together very nicely. I'll just echo what Rabbi Brett, and I think we all felt that day that we were actually saying our prayers, which is good, and building some empathy and understanding. At the same time, we were doing something that has long-term meaning and purpose.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it was nothing more fun than being out there and planting those trees. And of course, it helped tremendously that Keep Indianapolis Beautiful did the majority of the backbreaking work for us ahead of time. So I will just give you deep kudos, Jeremy, on that, to your whole team that was out there. It was really wonderful. But we had fun. I think we had a great time. And I think, from the Hindu perspective, we would call that karma yoga. That is, the work. Karma is the action, right? So it's being in action, and yoga is the meditation. So it's being in action and meditation. I think that's where we can meet each other all in the same field, and understand each other all, and benefit from all of it, because it was wonderful to hear the beautiful prayers from all the different traditions. And yes, then it was great to actually go and do something together as a unified humanity. And that is, I think, where we work best, is then when we find, instead of arguing our very small differences in the grand scheme of the universality of all of this, I think we are more together than we are separate. And so those kind of pieces of work help to remind us of that.
I muted myself. So that was really wonderful. Thank you for that. And I think just so others on this webinar can know, we Keep Indianapolis Beautiful arranged for an interfaith tree planting ceremony, and it was held on October 24th in Garfield Park, as has been mentioned. And we received, the mayor was there, and we received a proclamation about it as well. But it was 200 trees as part of the city's bicentennial, and those trees will grow for decades, and so it will be there for future generations to enjoy. But that isn't the end, that was the beginning. And so what I would like to just share with everyone who is still with us on the webinar right now, I am going to put into the chat box a link. One of the important things that is available to anyone that belongs to a house of worship, or lives in a neighborhood, or belongs to a community center, or has a group of friends, all of those qualify. Keep Indianapolis Beautiful has resources that are available, and in particular, trees. And so if there are particular neighborhoods that that you feel like would benefit from having more trees, especially along the city right-of-way, so along the street, not necessarily on the property of your house of worship, although that we can have that conversation as well. But just thinking about stretches that could be outside or near your favorite house of worship or place where you worship, or it could be your favorite park if you worship outdoors, or it could be your neighborhood community center. There are opportunities. The planting season, although it has been crazy warm the past few days, the planting season is coming to an end this fall. But so this would be planning for 2021. But it is a genuine offer to everyone that is on this call to apply for trees, and we will bring the trees, we will bring the crew, we will bring the youth. We work with high school students from across the city as part of a tree planting crew. So KIB will help, we'll bring the trees and help plant and maintain and prune and water those trees for the first 3 years, after which they should be able to take care of themselves. But it also is a really wonderful opportunity for folks that have not been able to engage with folks inside, as we discussed, a chance to engage your friends and congregants and other colleagues in an activity where, as we mentioned earlier, we are digging side by side and having that opportunity. So that was just one shout out that I wanted to mention. The other one is that, coming back to my Vap Asali story, you can also encourage folks to adopt a block. And if you adopt a block, it can be the block in front of your house. It can be the block in front of your place of business. It can be the block around your favorite house of worship. But KIB can help offer supplies of bags and litter grabbers, so you don't have to actually touch anything icky that you don't want to, gloves as well. And then you have this opportunity to not just be part of something in Indianapolis, but something that is actually aggregated nationwide by Keep America Beautiful, which is, we are part of that network. And so just in Indianapolis, KIB and volunteers have cleaned enough litter to create a stack of litter as tall as Salesforce Tower. So imagine Salesforce Tower filled with cigarette butts. That's what KIB has been able, and our volunteers have been able to remove from our city streets, which then roll into the White River and elsewhere. But again, if there are opportunities to sort of engage outdoors, and we want to make the outdoors look better, then there's this opportunity to partner with KIB. And I just would like to say that I am personally really interested in finding opportunities, not necessarily with individual congregations and houses of worship, but also, and particularly in light of this conversation, to see if there are interfaith opportunities. So I was just chatting recently with somebody who belongs to a Mennonite church, which is, I think, catty corner across the street from a Baptist church. And they were trying to, Brett, to your point, they were trying to figure out, like, what's the thing for us to get together? Like, how do we have more than just a small group of people that wants to do something together? And I said, well, this is the thing. Like why don't you have one group plant trees on one side, and then the next week go plant trees on the other side, but do it together. And so I think that there are some opportunities like that, and would love to offer that and offer that to folks that are watching and participating. Charlie, I didn't know if there were any sort of closing questions that you wanted to get to from the chat box, or if there were other thoughts that you had on behalf of CIC that you wanted to share with the group.
But no, I would definitely encourage just what you said, the fact that we can come together and you know, we've built houses of Abraham in the past. Now Habitat for Humanity is doing an interfaith house. So when we work together, I think we really get to know and understand and respect one another, and then contribute to that common good of building a better community, better society. We did have one question here. It was about stopping the destruction of the trees in Brazil. So we move into kind of we pull the lens way back and say, what is our international responsibility to, you know, climate care, to kind of address the climate issues and that type of thing. So that is a deep question that we could get involved with. But I also just want to end, Jeremy, by echoing what you said, that when we come together as different congregations, as a different faith group, to show a positive regard for our backyard, kind of like what Ashley was saying, that we pick up the trash that others have left, and we take responsibility for that, you know, Vop's story. I think that's when we really do live our faith in the best of our traditions. And we're all dependent on how we take care of this earth. Future generations are dependent on how good of stewards we are. And I think that all speaks to our religious traditions. So I don't know, Jeremy, or the panelists, if we want to dive into again, pull the lens way back and say, what is our responsibility to get involved? I don't know what the conversations are like in the different congregations when it comes to climate change. I know it's still a political issue, a policy issue. So I don't know if that would be a good closing or not. I'll leave that to you, Jeremy, but we are committed to continue to work with Keep Indianapolis Beautiful to bring congregations and different faith traditions together around building a better, more verdant community here in Indianapolis, one neighborhood, one block at a time. So thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Ashley, I see you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. It wasn't really a question though, was it? It was more just a statement. I do think it is our responsibility as individuals to pay attention and be aware of the global issues that impact us also. We are a global society. We're not just not just one country. We all depend on each other. However, I think that some of the blame, not all of it, but I think that some of the blame is misplaced by saying things like we need to recycle, because we do need to recycle. We absolutely do need to recycle. But the blame is not all on the individuals. In fact, most of the blame goes to these big giant companies. So this is really more of a political statement than having to do with faith. So I think, I'm not sure who it was that wrote that. I'm sure that they are aware that it's really more the big companies that are causing the big carbon footprints. So as individuals, what we can do is pay attention to our own carbon footprints and be aware of the types of companies that we support. So don't buy things with palm oil in them, because that's what's contributing to the destruction of the rainforest more than anything else. Don't buy McDonald's, because that's where they get their beef from. And pay more attention to the companies that you support, rather than just telling individuals you need to recycle or you need to become a vegetarian, because that's putting the blame off of where it should be. Paganism is very political. So it is still part of my faith to make these political statements. And we absolutely should be aware of the global impact that our faith makes on the world. And if your faith is not making the world a better place by supporting and uplifting marginalized individuals, then maybe you should be reevaluating the way your faith is helping the world.
Thanks, Ashley.
You're welcome for that heavy close.
Yeah, no, I you know, I certainly agree that there are local pieces and there are global pieces, and that we are part of that whole. Brett, do you want to weigh in as well?
Oh, I thought I just might bring a little levity to that, because what you're suggesting is really reminding me of The Good Place. Anyone out there fans of this TV show?
No.
It's a quirky little show, but my congregants who are here, some of you I noticed were also part of the group that decided we wanted to have a bigger discussion about the show and the theology behind it. There's one part of the show where they find a man who has dedicated his life to, quote, living right. He's off the grid. He's making his own clothes. He's filtering his own urine to recycle that for water. He, in any possible way, he is trying. He's trying to live that way. And the message of the show, not to spoil the episode for anyone, is that it's almost impossible to do. That we live in a world where, and Ashley, I'm not debating your point. I think it's exactly right. But it is really difficult to find, the list of all of the fast food restaurants and where they get source all their food from. And aside from just deciding you're going to be vegan or vegetarian, if you decide to engage in the world in that way, how do you do it? What's the quote right way to do it? It makes environmentalism just a little bit more complex for me, because I think there is no clear path. All we do is kind of take steps in the right direction. And it's a great show, so I'd watch it if you have.
I'll say real quickly too, this is something I learned from my brother. And when you spend money, every time you spend $1, you're voting for something, you're contributing to something, and you're endorsing something, or and there's a Rastafarian saying that when you're changing things in your life, it's like paddling a canoe, that you make small adjustments here and small adjustments there, that you're not going to just turn everything around in a minute. So I like to think whenever I'm spending, I think consumerism is a huge challenge, and that we have to take responsibility for the consumerism that we participate in. And so I just think if we become a little more intentional every time we buy, every time we spend, every time we endorse, and try to just make it a little bit better, that those small trends will make a big difference, and that it does influence other people in our lives. And I've in my 60 years, I've seen a lot of that happen. And I think we can all take some responsibility and also try to hold the big companies responsible as well.
Anita, do you want to have a last word?
No, I think we do have a responsibility to be engaged, be involved, and be aware. I think we all have different abilities and different capacities and different capabilities of doing those things. And so if we can all do them to the best of our abilities, capacities, and capabilities, I think we will be able to make those small steps to make the world a better place. And if you can advocate, in the global arena, and have, that ability to do it, I think it's important. And whenever we can, we should try. And so even though it seems like small voices sometimes for just one person to say something, I think sometimes it can make a huge difference. And it is helpful. I know that, during this pandemic, a lot of people went into gardening. We certainly did in our family. And so we spent a lot more time outside gardening, taking care of vegetables and the earth and getting our hands dirty. And I think there is something very spiritual in that practice, regardless of what your faith tradition is. Being able to tap into the earth and know that our nourishment comes from there and that we need to nourish her back, I think is really, really important. So I would just end with that and encourage everybody to do what they can to the capacity that they can.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, and I know that we've had a few other little comments in the chat box, but mostly about the good place and what things we can divine from that. But what I would like, I know that we had originally set aside a full 2 hours for this discussion, but I feel nourished by the discussion that we've been able to have. I'm so grateful to all of you who've taken time out to be on the panel today. I'm grateful to all of you who were able to join in, even though there was that last minute snafu on the Zoom address. So thank you for pivoting quickly. I think that is also one of our signs of community resilience, that we've all been able to figure out how to make these adjustments relatively quickly. And I would just like to close by saying it really is my sincere hope that that we can bring different faith traditions together and find some of those common values and really build community and a community that cares, and a community that will make I think it was Charlie's word, a more verdant Indianapolis. And so just want to thank you all for being part of this. As I've been instructed to share with all of you, there is the spiritandplace.org website where folks are encouraged to fill out a survey about this at the end and provide feedback. So if you would do that, I know that would be welcome, and we would love to see that feedback. And if you are interested in doing some work with KIB, please reach out. We are truly eager to work with all of you on projects that make the city a better place. And so with that, I'm going to close the discussion. I thank you all for being part of this. I hope you will attend other Spirit in Place events that are happening over the next few days. And be well, everyone.